us today. My name is Shada, and I'm an organizer with the Palestinian Youth Movement, and I'm honored to be your MC and to join you today. So before anything else, I want to ground all of us in the reality that people in Gaza are living through. Because while we have political developments unfolding here and across the globe, the conditions in Gaza are becoming even more catastrophic. We can go next slide, Rachel. Families who have already survived displacement, starvation, and nonstop bombardment are now confronting flooding that is tearing through the tent camps. People are waking up soaked, freezing, and surrounded by contaminated water. Sewage is running through areas where children sleep. Disease is spreading in places where hospitals barely function. And at the same time, with aid being so heavily restricted, starvation is deepening. Immune systems are collapsing, hunger is everywhere. And on top of the flooding, and on top of the starvation, and on top of the disease, the bombs are still falling. Families are still being massacred, burnt alive 2 years into this genocide. And on top of all of this, Canada remains complicit. Through weapon systems, parts, components, and political cover, this country is still materially tied to the violence and the genocide in Gaza. And that is the reality that shapes our responsibility and why we are all here today. So where are we at? Yesterday, we released a report that Hanin will go into. And today, just before this call, Bill C-233, better known as the No More Loopholes Act, was debated. So tonight, we're going to situate these developments, we're going to break down what they mean for us, and we're going to prepare ourselves for next steps and what we can do in this moment. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Hanin, who is an organizer with the Palestinian Youth Movement and one of the authors of the report, who will walk us through the findings.
Thank you, Shada. Hi, everyone. So our report reveals something, and maybe Rachel, thank you, reveals something that has been operating in the shadows, a direct pipeline of military aircraft parts, explosives flowing from Canadian factories and ports through the United States and then directly to the Israeli military. Specifically, we've tracked two major categories of goods. So first, the vital components for the F-35 fighter jets that Israel has been using in its bombardment against Gaza. And then second, massive quantities of explosives, which includes Canadian-made propellants and European TNTs that travels through Canadian ports all the way to the US plants that build the bombs that are being dropped on Gaza. And you might be asking, how is this happening, or how is this legal when permits are said to be frozen? And this is happening because of a critical loophole in the Canadian law that exempts most military goods that are sent to the US from permits and careful inspections. Now, despite official statements claiming that Canada is not fueling this genocide, the evidence in our report tells a different story. And today I'm going to walk you through the major findings of the report. If we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so let's look into the first major part of the report, which is the fighter jet components. And as you can see on the slide, we've documented a total of 611 aircraft parts shipments that originated from Canadian companies and are sent to the United States and then on to Israel. So a few examples here are Honeywell, Tech, Magellan Aerospace, Cyclone Manufacturing, and most of these shipments were sent actually for the F-35 fighter jet. Now, on top of that, we've tracked 360 of these shipments going directly to the Lockheed Martin F-35 assembly plant in Texas. And to be clear, these are not just generic parts. These are Canadian-made components that are integral to every F-35 jet that Israel uses. And the supply chain has been absolutely critical since the start of the genocide. Just to give you a sense of the scale, in just the first 2 months of the genocide, the US sold $94 million worth of fighter jet parts to Israel. So what we're seeing is not just like a one-time arms shipment, it's a constant, just-in-time delivery system that's designed to keep Israel's fleet fully operational. Next, please. Now, what are the impacts of the fighter jets? So the F-35 is one of the most advanced fighter jets in the whole world. It's specifically designed to drop massive 2,000-pound bombs. And we've seen exactly what this looks like in Gaza. These jets have been used repeatedly in strikes on so-called safe zones, places where families were told to seek shelter. And what we're looking right here, like on this picture, you can see the decimated tents and the absolute devastation of these jets. This picture is the aftermath of one of the airstrikes that were dropped on Al-Mawasi camp, which was a humanitarian zone. And this destruction is the final destination for the supply chain that we're exposing today. It's a direct line from Canadian manufacturers through the US straight to homes, hospitals, refugee camps, places where family were told that they would be safe. Next, please. So next part is going to be about the second major reveal in the report, which is the pipeline of explosives. And this part has two key parts: what is made in Canada and what is shipped through Canada. So let's first talk about what's made here. We've tracked 150 shipments from the two General Dynamics facility, so Valleyfield and Quebec, and they're sending explosives to US ammunition plants. And what's being made at these plants? The 2,000-pound bombs that I just spoke about, artillery shells, and tank rounds that have been sent to Israel. And to give you an idea of how critical this is, General Dynamics in Valleyfield, Quebec, is the only North American sole supplier for a specific propellant. And this propellant is actually essential for firing one of the artillery shells that have been devastating Gaza. And then Canada's role actually goes even deeper. So we're not just sending explosives from manufacturers in Canada, but we're actually a vital transit corridor. So we've documented over 400 shipments of TNT manufactured in Poland that arrived by ship in the port of Saguenay, and from there loaded onto trucks and driven across Canadian highways to the same US bomb-making factories. And the TNT is actually the key ingredient for the 2,000-pound bomb dropped by jets like the F-35. So we can see that Canada is both producing the ingredients of this genocide and paving the highway for foreign-made explosives. Next, please. So I'm sure some of you guys are thinking or wondering why Quebec? Why is TNT coming from Poland and taking this strange detour through Canada instead of just going directly to American ports? And it comes down to two simple things. First, capability and cost. So the port of Saguenay, it's not just any port. It's a major deep water hub. And more importantly, it's one of the few ports in Eastern North America fully equipped and certified to handle massive shipments of explosives. And then second, it's about the cost. So from Saguenay, you have the direct access to North American highway system. And it's also just cheaper and more efficient to unload the TNTs there and then truck the rest down to the US. So it's not just an accident, it's a deliberate business decision. And that decision has turned a Canadian port into an essential stop on the assembly line for the bombs that are being dropped in Gaza. Next, please. So what's the end results of these TNTs and the propellants that we just saw that were being sent from Poland and from General Dynamics? Well, on the left, you see the MK-84 bomb, which is that massive 2,000-pound bomb. That's the kind of weapon that's dropped by fighter jets like the F-35 or the F-16. And the TNT that comes through the port of Quebec is the primary ingredient for the bombs, for the MK-84 bombs. And on the right, we see the stacks of artillery shells. Those are 155 millimeter shells. And the propellant from General Dynamics Quebec is what fire these shells. This is one of the most heavily used weapons in the assault on Gaza. Next, please. Okay, so I don't want to go into complicated engineering technical diagrams, but I think it's important to see where exactly the materials we've been tracking end up. And then on the right, you see the MK84. So as you can see on the orange fill, this is where the explosive fill lies. And that explosive fill is a substance called tritonol. And tritonol is made of 80% TNT. So the TNT being shipped through Canada is the primary ingredient for these 2,000-pound bombs. And if we look to the left, we have the artillery diagram. And we also highlighted parts that show explicitly where, who are the suppliers. So in the list, the explosive TNT actually comes from Nitrochem, Poland, which is the exact same TNT that came from our port. And then second, it lists the propellant. It's also in yellow, but the propellant is made from General Dynamics. So the propellant is actually what fires the shells that are being launched into Gaza. Next, please. Okay, so very quickly, let's just visualize where these bombs go. On the left, we have the F-35, and this chart will just show you that it's armed with the MK-84 bombs. So that's where these bombs actually end up going on the fighter jets. And then we can see the stealth mode. So stealth mode is really just a way for the jet to be invisible to radar. And that actually carries 2 MK-84 bombs with a total of over 500 pounds of ordnance. On the right on the same image, but we have the beast mode. And the beast mode is essentially, it's different from the stealth. This is where targets doesn't matter anymore. Essentially, it's just sheer firepower that is the goal of these beast mode jets. So they load the jet with everything that they can carry on its wings, including up to 6 MK-84 bombs, which is a total payload of 22,000 pounds of ordnance. And on the right, you see the other piece of the puzzle. So that's the howitzer vehicle. It's a weapon system that fires the 155 millimeter artillery shells that we just talked about. So it's a weapon of bombardment, and the propellant used to fire a large number of these are being manufactured here in Quebec. Next, please. Okay, let's talk about the impact of the bombs and the artillery shells. So the image on the left, this is actually Jabalia refugee camp. This is when a single 2,000-pound MK-84 bomb hit the camp, and witnesses didn't just call it an explosion. They called it an earthquake. They said that the ground shook for miles. In an instant, 2 massive craters opened up, swallowed around 20 apartment buildings in one of the most densely populated areas. At least 195 Palestinians were martyred and 120 more missing under the rubble, and nearly 800 wounded. And this is just from one of these bombs. And now on the right, we can see the map, and this really shows the scale. Each one of those red dots on the map are MK-84 bomb craters. So there are nearly 600 of them documented here. So this means that the horrific scene in Jabalia has happened at least 600 times. Now, the red dots, as you can see, they're clustered around blue dots, and those blue dots are hospitals. And they were scattered all across the area inside that purple line. And that purple line is what? It's the so-called evacuation zone that Israel designated, telling people to go there if they wanted to be safe. So it's not just an accident, it's a pattern. It's systematic bombardment of residential areas, hospital, and safe zones. So to bring this all together, everything I've showed you today is just a snapshot of the detailed report that we published. There's so much more evidence in the full report, and I truly encourage everyone to read it. It's not a light read, but each and every one of us has a responsibility to understand the full scale of this complicity. So thank you, and I will pass it on to Rachel, who's going to speak about the political significance.
Thank you so much, Haneen, and to Shada, and really to everyone who's here tonight. We're well over 400 people who are here joining live, and I know others are planning on joining in other ways. Yeah, just hugely meaningful that we're coming together on a Wednesday night to dig into this. I mean, this report, like, it's devastating. I can say that as an author, but I think also that is the impact of reading it, and it's just like an unflinching look at the actual situation of Canada's ongoing complicity in these horrors. And I just can't give um like enough credit, and I just have to complete awe for Haneen, and especially the Montreal PYM research team, for just the like many hundreds of hours and millions of data points that were compiled together to put together this picture that we should never have had to put together. This should be transparent information. This should be in the public record. This should be what the Canadian government is accountable to and is sharing with the public, honestly. But in fact, obviously, that's not the case. And so instead, it's movement, groups, and researchers and individuals who have spent just countless hours to trace meticulously the shipments of military parts and of explosives. Um, and so I want to give real credit to that. And the reason that we do it is to share it with all of you and for this to be a movement report for all of us. A year and a half ago now, the Arms Embargo Now campaign was founded, but really for the entire over 2 years of this round of genocide, many thousands of us have been demanding that Canada stop arming Israel. Arms Embargo Now came together to put forward a clear, unchanging and constant demand to the Canadian government. And what an arms embargo means is a complete end to the flow of all military goods to and from Israel, so between Canada and Israel. This is a very clear demand. In fact, an arms embargo is defined on the Government of Canada website under the sanctions list. It says what an arms embargo is. So, really, what we're demanding is crystal clear. And unfortunately, instead of meeting this demand, instead of honestly responding to it, even for 24 months, what the government has been doing, as we have been showing up in the tens of thousands, sometimes every week, on the streets, at MPs' offices, in our parks, in our faith communities, instead, what the government has been responding with is by trying to placate us. They've had shifting and contradictory claims. We have moved them enormously from where they were 2 years ago, which was, of course, we will always arm our biggest ally in the Middle East. They're not saying that now. Now they're saying, oh, of course, we're not going to be arming Israel. But in fact, so much of what they've said has been misleading at best and sometimes outright lies. What this report has revealed, just to underscore what Haneen said, and this is new information, we can now confidently point to the ways that Canada is indeed still making and shipping key parts of both Israel's most destructive warplane and the bombs it is dropping. And as Shada said, these bombs have not stopped falling. So I want to dig in a little bit more about what the government has been saying, just to make sure we are clear, because it was over a year ago now, the Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly promised that Canada, and I quote, "We will not have any form of arms or parts of arms be sent to Gaza, period. How they're being sent and where they're being sent is irrelevant." She said this in response to enormous pressure from all of us. And what happened in response to that was that the Canadian government did suspend and pause many of the shipments permits that they had, the export permits that they had issued for direct exports from Canada to Israel. However, they clearly did not cut off the types of shipments that we've tracked in this report, and we'll get more into that in a minute. And then there's been many things the government have said. These are just a few big ones from our foreign affairs ministers. And then just 3 months ago, after Arms Embargo Now released our first major report laying out these shipments, in that case was directly from Canada to Israel, of weaponry. When we confronted the government with that evidence that those shipments had indeed continued, then the new Minister of Foreign Affairs, Anita Anand, in that case, acknowledged the shipment of arms to Israel continuing, but claimed that these military exports to Israel were somehow not being used in Gaza. She reassured the public by saying what I've put here on this slide: we will not allow Canadian-made weapons to fuel this conflict in any way. And she claimed that they were cutting off all permits for any arms that could be used in Gaza. So again, despite these repeated claims that Canadian weapons were not being used in that way, this report has shown a continuous flow of these hundreds of shipments. In this case, what we have shown in this report is that these hundreds of shipments of Canadian military goods are going directly to the key U.S. factories that are making Israel's bombs and Israel's military aircraft. We know that the U.S. is the primary supplier of Israel's weaponry, of Israel's machines of war. And what we're showing here is that Canada remains a very active participant in this genocide by ensuring that these U.S. factories that are sending Israel its main warplanes and its bombs have exactly what they need to do so. So otherwise put, every F-35 has millions of dollars of Canadian parts. And now we've also tracked these 2,000-pound bombs Israel's using are also full of Canadian explosives, or even of these Polish explosives that have been laid out that we now see have to travel through Canadian ports on our highways in order to get put into these bombs. So I'm going to continue here by just digging in a tiny bit more into the ways in which this is happening. Because what we see now is that despite what the Canadian government has been telling us about canceling permits and so forth, this whole time, the vast majority of the weapons from Canada to Israel, in fact, did not even require a permit because they traveled through the U.S. en route to Israel using what we've been calling the U.S. loophole. This is a gap in Canadian arms export controls. We can send out these slides after, and I won't read them in full, but the basic gist of this loophole is that every year billions of dollars of Canadian military goods go to the US, and because of this loophole, they do not require a permit. They do not even get tracked by the Canadian government. The Canadian government has no clue what is happening with these weapons we are sending to the US. For all we know, some of them are being used by ICE. Some of them have definitely been used to bomb Venezuelan ships in the past few weeks, which is well documented. And our report lays out the ways in which tons of them end up in the weapons that US then sends on to Israel. This loophole is absolutely allowing the government to pretend that it has no responsibility for these Canadian weapons that are being used to devastating effect, as Haneen laid out in Gaza. But I want to say that this is not bureaucratic oversight. This is systematic deception. And the report that we're launching this week really is exposing one of the biggest propaganda campaigns in Canadian foreign policy in decades. This is a very big deal. However, it wasn't enough to launch a report this week. This week is also, as my colleague will speak with you about in a minute, and a very important moment for us to try to change the situation around this legal loophole that is allowing these weapons to travel untracked, unpermitted, unreported to the US. Member of Parliament Jenny Kwan has just introduced the No More Loopholes bill in the Canadian Parliament, and in fact, it had its first hour of debate today. This is a bill that is aiming to fix this legal issue. And I won't get into it in detail. For those who want to read the entire bill, we can link to it later. But basically, this bill seeks to do 5 things. The first is to close that US loophole we've been talking about, which means that weapons companies in Canada that want to export weapons to the US will have to get a permit, just like they have to for every other country on Earth right now. Number 2, it also treats parts of weapons, like the weapons that they are. If you're sending part of a bomb, that should be regulated the same way as if you're sending an entire bomb, for instance. It also further clarifies that if something that is being sent is at risk of being complicit in war crimes, it needs to be banned. Right now, current legislation sort of implies the Canadian government should step in and stop such permits. This makes it clearer that, as the Arms Trade Treaty stipulates, it in fact needs to just be a ban. It also ends these giant permits that are being used right now that let kind of many goods go through all at once without scrutiny. It's kind of a way of not having a permit. This says, in fact, no, if you're exporting weapons, those weapons need to have permits. And then finally, it increases transparency. As I said right off the bat, we should not be the ones who are having to force transparency by fighting tooth and nail against the Canadian government. This should just be a matter of standard reporting by the government every year. So this is one of the key demands that we are putting forward right now. The demand, I mean, to be clear, the demand was, is, and will always be for a full arms embargo on Israel. But how we're asking the government to implement that right now is by, number one, just going ahead and using existing Canadian sanctions legislation to impose an arms embargo on Israel, as they've done for other countries. And then number two, to pass the No More Loopholes bill. That way we permanently change Canadian law to deal with all of these holes in our export controls, to make sure that we will know where Canada is sending weapons to and we can stop it every step of the way. And with that, I'm really pleased to pass the microphone over to Saleha, Justice for All Canada.
Well, thank you so much to all of my teammates at the Arms Embargo Now Coalition and the supportive organizations. And so amazing to be in a room filled with very inspiring advocates and activists in their own right. All of your support has made all of our efforts possible, from the report to today's webinar. My name is Saleha Farouk. As was said, I am an advocacy programs manager from Justice for All Canada. And I had the distinct pleasure of watching, as well as with many of you alongside us, a momentous debate that was presented by, of course, NDP MP Jenny Kwan. She opened the floor to the official second reading of the No More Loopholes Act, or Bill C-233, as Rachel had so succinctly summarized for us. And so we know that the debate tonight about the bill, it is quite a landmark and a rare moment when Parliament was directly confronted with Canada's role in basically a global arms trade. And so MP Jenny Kwan had put onto the floor a really important conversation about Canada's complicity, in fact, and a moment where she had said in so many words that we refuse to hide that sense of complicity anymore. And this was also a moment when the loophole that Canada uses to kind of move around these unregulated weapons, as was discussed, into conflict zones and genocidal zones, such as occupied Palestine. It's an opportunity for her to have named it what it was, which is a pathway to human rights abuses with Canada's help. And so I want to take a moment to really just acknowledge, and we should all acknowledge and feel quite motivated in what she did. Her delivery was direct. If you were watching, if not, that's okay. I'm going to try my best to provide a little bit of a summary for you. She put forth quite an uncompromising argument, specifically that the U.S. exemption is a major loophole, while allowing Canadian-made components to be used in atrocities through said loophole. She stated very clearly that Canada risks complicity, in fact, is complicit, we can say, in genocide and war crimes, specifically when exports move through the U.S. without any assessment or controls and end up in apartheid Israel. She emphasized that manufacturers have nothing to fear if their exports genuinely comply with the Arms Trade Treaty. And we will definitely go into some of the pushback arguments that have to do with Canadian manufacturers and Canadian jobs, and these kinds of institutions that do, in fact, help out our economy. She did remind her colleagues in the House that Canadians do not want any blood on their hands, despite the issue or wherever the conflict is. And in addition to Gaza and occupied Palestine, I know that Saudi Arabia was mentioned as well. And we also know quite recently with a migrant crisis in the U.S. That if weapons are ultimately going through the U.S., that unfortunately some of that could be used by ICE agents in the way that they are targeting migrants right now. And it's a horrible situation, human rights violations as well. And so she set the tone for a sense of equal scrutiny that should be applied to all destinations, including the US, to stop specifically Canadian-made material from reaching these high-risk states. And of course, right now we're focusing on the ongoing genocide. And so I also want to give credit to a number of MPs from across the board that have very courageously seconded her motion. And we know right now that every one of us, including yourself and myself, can pick up the phone or send an email to our local MP and to urge them to second the motion so that it could ultimately pass and become law. So a couple of liberal seconders would be MP Faris Saoud, MP Salma Zahed, MP Nathaniel Erskine Smith, MP, a new MP from the Liberal Party, I think just as of today or a couple of days ago, MP Aslam Rana, I think from the Hamilton area in Ontario. A couple of NDP seconders would be MP Leah Gazan, MP Gord Johns, and MP Laurie Idlout, as well as, of course, MP Elizabeth May as from the Green Party. So we know that we have these incredible MPs with quite extensive human rights portfolios and human rights backgrounds in their own right that have stood up for all kinds of atrocities and have stood against Canadian or North American complicity. And so we have them using their voice again. So we should feel motivated to get more of their colleagues to second Bill C-233. And so it was a really good debate in the sense that we had MPs from the Bloc Québécois, the Conservative Party even, actually raise a number of very good agreements or points from the Loopholes Act. So, for example, multiple opposing MPs, they acknowledge the intent behind the bill, which is, and they acknowledge that it is legitimate and it is grounded in real human rights concerns as it relates to the genocide against Palestinians. They did also recognize the goal of preventing Canadian parts from contributing to crimes by apartheid Israeli forces. And one of the biggest, I would say, arguments in support of the bill actually came from the Bloc Québécois. We also had MP Michael Chong from the Conservative Party. He did thank MP Jenny Kwan a number of times for her intentions behind the bill, for her very worthy human rights intentions. We did see that the Bloc said that that Canada's recognition should prevent diversion of arms and weapons parts to abusive militaries. I think that was a great term that was used. So specifically, Bloc MP Simon Pierre Savard Tremblay, he did state that Canada should not support criminal actions in Palestine. He named the region, he named the Palestinians, and he did say that we should not enable these weapons to reach the Israeli military. He acknowledged that any kind of diversion to third countries would be a real problem, and it would be not good for Canada to be involved. And he did say that the bill reflects a sense of goodwill, and he did praise the humanitarian motivation behind it. I also noticed that the Liberal Parliamentary Secretary for the Foreign Affairs Ministry, MP Mona Fortier, she did recognize that Canadians were concerned about the role in global human rights, global arms transfers in global human rights issues. She acknowledged that Canadian constituents from across the country are raising concerns about Canada's role in the global arms market. She talked about the human rights impact of Canadian exports, and she did affirm that Canadians care deeply about preventing the misuse of arms. So if you think about it, this is someone that's directly working in the Foreign Affairs Ministry office. So for me personally, it does indicate that our emails and our phone calls and our protests are definitely being heard, especially for somebody like her to make those acknowledgements. We also had MP Rob Oliphant, who is also parliamentary secretary. He did acknowledge the need for stronger export controls when it comes to the military. He emphasized that the oversight and accountability matter, even if they ultimately disagreed with the way that this bill is designed in its internal mechanism. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. We saw that Liberal MPs, as well as Conservatives, had agreed that human rights are central to the decisions of arms exports. They repeatedly stated that human rights considerations are at the core are at the core of Canada's export regime, but we are arguing that we are seeing a very clear bias when it comes to if that end recipient are Palestinians in occupied Palestine. We did see a number of acknowledgements that human rights standards should be both protected as well as strengthened and not weakened, especially as it relates to the new budget that came out and as it relates to Canada's role in arms exports as well. And lastly, I just wanted to acknowledge that Conservative MP Michael Chong, he recognized that the goal of preventing weapons was for them to not to reach adversaries as well. And we also saw his colleague James Bazan, MP James Bazan, speak up and agree with him as well. And ultimately, I think that across the board, opposition MPs, when they did stand up to kind of debate or to speak against the motion, they all accepted the principle more or less that Canadian businesses should be accountable, especially when the end user are in areas that are prohibited when it comes to weapons and arms and things like that. So moving forward, it is important for us to know as activists and advocates and people that are working in this space what we are up against. It's important to focus on the positives, but as well as those challenges so that we can be all the more prepared, I would say, and increase that sense of awareness and education that could help strengthen our resolve. And so there are a number of I would say inaccurate claims that were made by these members of parliament. And I just wanted to highlight them really briefly. So I think it was mentioned that Canada already has a world-class export system. This was asserted by the Liberals. They said something along the lines of Canada's efforts, quote unquote, exceeding the requirements put forth by the Arms Trade Treaty. We know that that's not true. There were some claims about, if we were to close that U.S. exemption, that it would result in harming national security for Canada. That's also not true either. They said a few things along the lines of the destabilization between Canada and the U.S. defense industry. And they also said something along the lines of the Canadian government not being able to control what the United States does. That may or may not be true, but we can control what we do in the meantime, and we can control what we let or allow to go through those export systems into the USA. And lastly, there were a number of kind of technical or procedural concerns that were raised that was basically saying that to implement this bill practically might just be a little bit too difficult for them to do. However, we know that that's not true. And from the incredible research that was done for a long time, but specifically from the latest report that was covered in the first part of this this webinar program, is that Article 4 of the Arms Trade Treaty already requires very explicit control of parts and components and arms technology. In Canada, we know that they've not legislated this yet. So if we were to move forward with the bill, it would help fill a gap that Canada has avoided since ratifying the Arms Trade Treaty for some time. The U.S. exemption as well, it's the largest risk hole in this entire system, if you think about it. And so Canada already technically doesn't conduct any kind of risk assessment on any items exported to the USA, despite being the largest destination for Canadian military goods. That's very interesting, and I think that's the weakest part of their argument, I would say. So once inside U.S. supply chains, Canadian items cannot then also be tracked, which does further violate the Arms Trade Treaty, it makes for risks in the pre-transfer assessment as well. We know that supply chain disruption. We know that their arguments as it relates to disrupting the supply chain also reveal another issue, which is if the oversight disrupts the F-35 supply chain, that is because Canadian parts are flowing into systems used by states at high risk of committing these violations. And so economic convenience cannot override treaty obligations to prevent contributing to war crimes. In terms of whether or not we can control the U.S., it's not a legal argument or a credible one. The Arms Trade Treaty imposes duties on Canada, not the USA. Canada must conduct risk assessments before the actual export, and also if the U.S. if U.S. like weapons firms or manufacturing firms avoid our suppliers due to oversight, that only proves a sense of urgency of actually closing the loophole. And of course, in practicality, their argument of this being impractical does not exempt Canada from international law. Challenges in implementing the No More Loopholes Act would not eliminate binding obligations to prevent diversion or misuse. So I think challenges aside, it's just an opportunity for all MPs to come together and to just review the bill and support it. And if they feel like there are gaps in implementation, they could actually suggest solutions or other alternatives so that we could actually perhaps even strengthen the bill, maybe in some parts where it might have been watered down in the journey of the bill to the House recently. We know that Rob Oliphant spoke a little bit about NATO. He said that oversight would not undermine NATO or any support to the Ukraine. And we know that allies themselves do conduct human rights risk screening under their own national laws, and risk-based permitting still allows compliant exports while preventing transfers with substantial risk as well. So that's just in regards to the number of times that he had brought up the issue of the Ukraine as well. And so this will create a challenge. This bill does force a kind of a shift in how Canada approaches arms exports, and it could be a very good thing as well. This bill in a very interesting way challenges these long-standing assumptions that economic integration with the U.S. justifies a kind of minimal scrutiny that shouldn't be the case, especially when it has to do with the human rights of Palestinians. So I think what we're doing here with the bill is we're challenging their kind of political comfort or discomfort, and we're also challenging Canada's defense industry for one of the first time to operate with a sense of transparency instead of these exemptions that are very automatic and that are very systematic as well. And another point that was brought up by one of my teammates is that this is a moment that forces the Canadian government to debate its own complicity in the genocide. We love the bill for that reason as well, in that it's very much threefold in the positive impact that it has. And so in terms of kind of closing the message around today's amazing debate, we like to think of it as a historic step towards transparency. Our job is not yet done. And even with the opposition from major parties, we believe that the truth is now on the record, that Canada's export system is definitely not compliant with the full scope of the Arms Trade Treaty, that the U.S. exemption does shield dangerous transfers from scrutiny. And without any kind of change, Canada does continue to be complicit in serious violations of international law in occupied Palestine. And so with a bill like C-233, I wanted to kind of move on to talking about how we can expect it to kind of move through Parliament, as we hope that it becomes law very soon with all of our support as well. And so kind of just going through there I am. Yes. So the bill was basically first introduced around September's time, and this is when members of Parliament were first introduced to basically the substance of the bill when it was a private member's motion. And then moving forward to today, which was basically November 19th, second reading. It's when MPs had an opportunity to debate the purpose and the principle of the bill, and it was a key moment for them to indicate their support. And the date that I really wanted to focus on is February of next year. We're quite literally at the end of the year, so we're just a couple of months away. And that date, approximately February 23rd, 2026, it could shift, but tentatively, it's another chance for members of parliament to speak to the merits of the bill. And in the lead up to the state, we can be pushing for MPs to not only vote in favor of it, but also articulate their support for it during another debate at the time. So that's on the 23rd, and we are foreseeing on the 25th, a couple of days later, basically a vote. So the vote would be the main focus and the main phase of this campaign. It would basically be another opportunity for all of us to reach out to policymakers, meaning MPs and senators, to ask them to vote yes. And if the bill passes, it would be accepted in principle and sent to the committee to be kind of further studied and potentially go into operation. If it could go into committee, that would be a very significant win for our movement, and it would be a significant loss for the Israeli lobby and the warmongers who are profiting off of the arms manufacturers. Three more stages of the bill, which we don't necessarily have the the actual date just yet, but still kind of to be determined, would be the committee stage. So if the House agrees in principle, the bill would move to committee for a study. And at this stage, you might be familiar with the use of experts kind of on camera, on the microphone, as well as impacted people kind of talking about how the situation has impacted them. And then we move forward to the report stage and third reading. So after a committee review, the bill would return to the House for final consideration. And at that stage, the vote is mostly decisive. And then lastly, the bill goes towards the Senate for royal assent. So if the House passes the bill would move forward to the Senate for the same process. First reading, second reading, committee stage, reporting stage, and third reading. It concludes with the royal assent before becoming law. And from the members of the Senate, we know that it would be unlikely for those senators to vote against the will of the House. And with that, I'm very happy to pass it over to my teammate, Johanna, from the Palestinian Solidarity Network.
Hi, everybody. And thank you so much, Zaleha, for walking us through some of those parliamentary details. Rachel, I'm just going to actually share my own screen for a second. So as Zaleha mentioned, many of the politicians in the House of Commons who are debating this bill today would really rather maintain the status quo that keeps us complicit in Israel's war crimes. So this is going to be a fight. It's going to take all of us to try to get this bill passed and to try to close the loopholes that are egregiously continuing to allow Canadian arms to flow to Israel. The report that Haneen summarized is horrifying, and I hope that folks take the time to read it. But it really is a tool for our movements. It's our job to turn this evidence into a crisis for the government and really force them to confront the truth that they would rather bury. So to accompany this report, what we have prepared for you is a new and updated toolkit that has all kinds of talking points and templates and tips and tools to allow all of us to make use of this report and help generate a crisis for our government. So I'm just going to show you what that resource looks like now, and then we'll talk through some of it on this call. So now if you go to our nice website at armsembargonow.ca/no-more-loopholes, you'll see a new button has appeared, Toolkit, Take Action in Your Community. And if you click on this button, you will find this lovely toolkit that we've prepared for you that includes all kinds of information. It'll cover some of the same stuff we've talked about on this call, in terms of how the US loophole works, which Rachel was explaining, in terms of the findings that Haneen presented about this damning report that was released yesterday, about the No More Loopholes Act that we're watching move through Parliament in the next couple months. But it also, most importantly, includes stuff that you need to take action with this report, to use this evidence to raise awareness in your communities about the scale of the problem and fight for a solution in the form of this No More Loopholes Act. So as you can see here, and I'll walk through some of these tactics in a second, we've got a variety of things that you can do, whether you are one individual or whether you have a whole team behind you. We've got all kinds of tips to make that as easy as possible for you. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second, but I would really encourage everybody after this call to take a look at that toolkit, because that's what's going to help us make the most use of the opportunity that we have before us. Rachel, do you mind sharing slides again for a second? Awesome. So the first thing that we need to do is to use this report to raise awareness about the US loophole that has allowed Canada to continue to arm Israel, while Israel continues, despite the so-called ceasefire, to drop bombs on Gaza. So in the next couple weeks and months, we need to use this new report to ensure that everybody in our communities knows what the US loophole is, why it's such a problem, and how the No More Loopholes Act can close it. That means our organizations, our networks, our families, our communities need to understand the stakes, that our government is complicit in the horrors that Haneen outlined earlier, that we've all been witnessing play out for the last over 2 years. So we are trying to use this report to generate a political crisis and make it impossible for the government to sweep this report under the rug or to pretend this PMB never happened. They would rather not have to debate this, and we are going to force them to and really make it impossible for them to move on and continue to be complicit in Israel's genocide. As we know, Israel hasn't stopped bombing Gaza, and now we have this damning evidence that contradicts the government's claims, so we have to use it to educate, energize, and mobilize people into action. And I've got some pictures on this slide that you can see folks across the country. Maybe some of you on this call or even on this slide or have been involved in some actions much like this. I'm encouraging folks here to take the time to read the report, to talk to your loved ones about this report. I'm going to, put a little template text in the chat that you can send to friends or family, just to take a few minutes to spread the word about this new evidence that has just dropped. We've got an amazing social media team who's prepared all kinds of social media graphics and reels, so you can share those on your own platforms, on your organizational platforms. We need to get the word out as far and wide as possible. I'm also would encourage folks here to get out in your community. So whether that's just you on your own doing some flyering or postering, as you can see on this slide, or whether that's you getting a team of people and organizing a canvassing day. There are folks on the slide at the bottom there who are going door knocking every week to try to generate some support for this bill and to spread the word about Canada's complicity. There's all kinds of ways that we can keep doing that political education in our communities to make sure that this crisis and scandal really gets the traction and the attention that it deserves. The photo in the middle there is from PYM Toronto's town hall in the summer. It was in the aftermath of the first Arms Embargo Now report, so some folks on this call may have been there or at similar events. I'd encourage folks to plan a town hall or attend a town hall. These are an amazing way to help connect with others locally, spread the word, and really plug into local organizing. And Shata is just going to drop some links now in the chat. So we've got town halls actually planned in the next couple weeks in Toronto, Mississauga, Ottawa, Kitchener-Waterloo, and Montreal. I'm sure more will come, so stay tuned for more details and follow-up emails as more events emerge. Another way to help raise awareness and spread the word and really generate some attention on this report and on the findings that it has laid bare. Another trick is that we can write letters to the editor. That's one way to get the findings from this report into local or national newspapers. So for folks in the chat who've been saying I'm not attached to an organization yet, but I really want to do things, this is something you can do to help reach more people. And it can be we're going to be launching a new tool next week that can help kind of make that easier for folks. But I would encourage people to just, if you have some time, read the report and put your outrage into words, and let's try to make sure as many people as possible are forced to confront this truth. Really, I just, the point of this first bucket of work, which is just to really engage with the evidence here, is that the findings are actually scandalous. Canadian arms are being ongoingly shipped to fuel Israel's genocidal violence, and the Canadian government has been lying about it and gaslighting us for 2 years. So that makes it really up to us to help educate our community and ensure that the public knows what's up. As Rachel said, the government should be being transparent about this, and they won't be on their own. So we really have to force them to confront this truth. Can we go to the next slide? Thanks. So then the other piece of the puzzle, of course, is that we have to try to solve that problem and close the US loophole that is allowing this ongoing flow of weapons to Israel. And that means right now fighting to try to pass the No More Loopholes Act that Saleha walked us through. It's, as she mentioned, going to a vote at the end of February. So that means that we have the next, 2 and a bit months to 3 months to really make sure that as many MPs as possible are forced to vote in favor of this. And that means they need to know that there is widespread public support for this action. So once we've reached out to people in our lives, to our networks and our communities, we have to direct all their outrage and energy towards those who have the power to actually close the US loophole, and that's our MPs. We have until the end of February, as I said, to kind of whip the votes from the ground up and make sure that we can pass this bill. And that means contacting our MPs again and again to explain the egregiousness of this loophole in our arms export regime, to talk about the findings of the report, and to demand the action that it would actually take to shut this loophole down and to pass Jenny Kwan's private member's bill. Now, I know many of folks on this call have probably already been pushing your MPs on this bill, but what I will say is that we now have even more leverage. So we have concrete evidence of how the US loophole functions to keep Canadian arms flowing to Israel, and we now also have a concrete timeline. This bill has been officially, as of today, presented. It's entered the second reading phase in Parliament, and MPs now have to decide how they are going to vote on it. So that helps us kind of push back on some of the stalling and tactics that you may have been receiving from your MPs in the last couple of weeks. So, of course, many of us are familiar with trying to get our MPs to do things. It'll start with emailing and phoning them, and Shata's going to help us do that in just a few minutes. But it can't stop there. We have to also make sure that others in our community are joining us, right? That we are amplifying our efforts by joining alongside our neighbors to really apply that pressure. The first graphic on this slide here is from a little phones app action that our friends at IJV Hamilton did. This was just last week. And actually today, their MP, Liberal MP Aslam Rana, who they had been calling last week to pass to push them to support the Bill C-233, actually jointly seconded the bill just hours before it was tabled in Parliament. So that's a huge win for local organizing in Hamilton, and it just shows how powerful we can be when we come together and direct our efforts at our MPs and with a clear, concrete political ask. You can also see folks here delivering a report to their MP's office in that bottom corner. This is a crew who did kind of a postcard campaign where they collected letters from their neighbors, fellow constituents to bring to their MP's office. There's all kinds of ways we can get creative, work together, and kind of escalate our efforts. I would encourage everybody here to print out a copy of the report and bring it to your MP's office, give it to their staffers, tell their staffers to read it. You could even read the executive summary. It's, 1 page, 1.5 pages there. Read it to the staffer. Make it impossible for them to ignore the findings that have been unveiled by this incredible team of researchers. You can also track where your MP is going to be this holiday season. Find them at their holiday parties and community events. You can ask them good faith questions about how they're reacting to this report and how they plan to vote, or you can be more confrontational depending on where your own MP is at and how hard you've been pushing on this issue for the last 2 years. There's all kinds of ideas that you can escalate with protests or postering campaigns, like some of the things you can see on this slide, to again force the hand of your MP to really feel the pressure from the ground up and feel the pressure to switch tracks if they need to and vote in favor of this bill. When you hear back from your MP, we need you to let us know what they say. If they commit to vote in favor of the bill, we can track that so we have a sense of how many votes we have on side. And there's a tracking form linked on the same website, armsembargonow.ca/no-more-loopholes, that everything is happily lives there. So you can tell us what your MP is telling you. That's really helpful for us as a national campaign. And I know, again, some of you have already been working on pushing this bill, and as we can see in these incredible photos, but we have new wind in our sails. It's really just an important opportunity for us to take advantage and leverage this opportunity. If your MP has been saying, denying or downplaying the existence or the scale of the problem, we now have such concrete and heartbreaking evidence of just how egregious the problem is, and we can really see the impacts of Canadian arms on the ground in Gaza, as documented in this report. And if your MP comes back at you with some new set of denials or evasions or excuses, again, please let us know, because we will help you, equip you with good counterpoints and talking points to come back at them and keep pushing in these next crucial few months. Next slide, please, Rachel. Great. So whatever you do, tell the story about your actions, whether it's a couple of folks canvassing at subway SkyTrain stations. That's what's happening in the second video from Vancouver. That first video is from across Toronto Day of Action that happened in the aftermath of the first report. And these are some examples of news stories that from media coverage that folks were able to get for some various actions around an arms embargo that have happened in the last couple of months. So social media and media are our friends. They can help us tell the story, spread the word, get more eyes on the problem, get more people energized and agitated and motivated and taking action alongside us. This is how we can continue to help grow our movements. And the media, again, is, the mainstream media would happily not cover this often. So we have to really be newsworthy, invite journalists to come out to our events and give them a good story so that folks will provide us the coverage that we need and deserve. I just want to also shout out our friends at East End Acts, which is one of the PSN groups in Toronto, who were able to get their MP, Nathaniel Erskine-Smith, to not only second the bill, but also write an op-ed about it, an arms embargo. This was before the PMB was really had much traction in the Toronto Star. So that's another example of ways that we can creatively use the media to actually get our voices out further and reach more people. All in all, I'm going to wrap up now because I know we're running a little bit late. This toolkit has all kinds of resources and supports. We've got a team of folks at the Arms Embargo Now campaign who are here to support you every step of the way. And really, I want to encourage everybody on this call to think about what you can do with this report. We've been confronted now with the hard facts, the evidence of just how big this problem is. And it's up to all of us now to take that evidence and run with it and use it to create a problem for our government and force them to vote in order to close off the loopholes. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Shada, who's going to help us take some action right now, tonight on the call. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Johanna, for perfectly outlining our next steps. And thank you, Haneen, Rachel, and Saliha. So really quickly, no one leave. You're going to go to armsembargonow.ca/no-more-loopholes, and we are going to first email our MPs together. So for the ones that I can see on the call, pull out your phone or go on your laptop. We're going to go to armsembargonow.ca/no-more-loopholes, and we are going to quickly email our MPs. This should take you a couple of seconds, but it has an impact. So once you're done, it's okay if you already emailed, do it again and again and again and again. We got to keep bothering them. So once you're done, click done in the chat, and then we'll go to the next one. I want to see who's writing done. You can type it in armsembargonow.ca/no-more-loopholes. Okay, I'm seeing a few. So while everyone else is going through the email, we're going to also call our MPs on this call, and I'm going to leave a voicemail with you all. So pick out your phone, find your MP's number right now, and let's call together. So my MP is Bardish Chagger. So I am going to call her now. And I'm going to read with you all the script that we have here. And of course, you can adjust it depending on what makes sense for your locale or your context. But right now, everyone pull out your phones and let's all call our MPs and leave a voicemail.
You have reached the constituency office of the Honorable Bardish Chagger. This is open Monday to or you can send us an At the tone, please record your message.
Hello, my name is Sheda, and I'm a concerned resident of the Waterloo riding. I just saw a new report full of evidence that Canadian arms components are still being sent to Israel despite the government promising many times that they had stopped. It is unacceptable for Canada to send bomber jet parts and explosives to the US arms factory supplying Israel's military, while Israel continues to bomb, displace, and starve Palestinians. The deadly pipeline of weapons aren't tracked by Canada and don't even require a permit because of a loophole in Canadian arms export laws that exempt military exports that travel to the US. For this reason, I support Bill C-233, the No More Loopholes Act that was debated in Parliament today. As your constituent, I urge you to do the right thing and vote yes for the No More Loopholes Act in order to end Canada's complicity in Israel's genocide. I will call you back to discuss this further. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing from you. And also remember, as mentioned by Johanna, if your MP gets back to you, be sure to fill out the MP response form. So while everyone is still calling their MPs, I'm going to close this off very quickly, but we're going to end with saying that the conditions in Gaza are not distant, they are not theoretical, they are not unfolding in some abstract place on the map, they are being produced every single day by the systems that Canada continues to feed through weapons, through components, and political alignment. And because of that, we can't all leave this call tonight ending with just awareness or just reflection. We have to end tonight with movement. We have a report that exposes Canada's role with undeniable clarity. We have a bill on the floor of Parliament, and we have a campaign structure that is built for all of us to plug into and to do the work. So we have a responsibility, every single one of us on this call. What happens next is what you do after this call ends and how you take this campaign further. Do we build pressure? Do we escalate? Do we move our campuses, our unions, our workplaces, our neighborhoods, our community spaces? Do we make it impossible for MPs to vote anything other than yes on this bill? And do we treat Canada's complicity as something that we can actually interrupt? Because that is the task ahead of us. So when we log off, the work will start immediately. Email your MP, call your MP, move your networks, organize the people around you, because Gaza does not need our grief. Gaza needs our organization, and Gaza needs us to make this government feel the weight of what they are enabling. So we are going to end tonight with commitment to build, to escalate, and to organize with discipline and purpose. Thank you all for being here today, and now let's all get to work together. Thank you, everyone. Thank you all.